Welcome back. You're still watching Politics Tonight, digging beyond the headlines. And now to our interview with the guest of the day. I am joined by a journalist, author, and former Deputy Principal Spokesman of the Tinubu Presidential Campaign, Ajuri Ngelale, for discussion on leveraging foreign relations for economic growth in the Tinubu agenda. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, my dear sister. Good evening to you and good evening to all of our esteemed viewers.
So, after much anticipation, the administration of Bola Tinubu has taken off. But what should Nigerians expect from President Tinubu in his attempt to tackle the challenges facing Nigeria?
Well, you know, for those of us in particular who believed from the beginning that His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was the man who had a proven track record of performance as a former governor of Lagos State, and that he could replicate that nationally. For those of us who believed that we have elected a decision maker on whose desk the buck stops, we have been vindicated. We have seen the events over the course of the last several hours since he first sat in the office on Tuesday morning. And we have seen a rapid reaction on his part to issues and situations that have evolved in the country. I would point you to the development that took place in Ikoyi just some time ago, where officials of the Department of State Security essentially barricaded and closed off the EFCC office quarters in Lagos. It was without any serious amount of time passing, just a few hours before President Bola Ahmed Tinubu released an immediate directive for the DSS to immediately evacuate that facility. That's just one example. When His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu told Nigerians and indeed told the international community on the day of his inauguration that the subsidy is gone, Nigerians can see today that he is a man of his words. When he says it, he means it. And when the subsidy is gone, it is gone for good. We have seen that. And I must take this moment to really applaud our people across this country who have seen the adjustment in the pump price around the country and recognize that what is good for the country now is to ensure that the tens of billions of dollars that is being pillaged by just a few individuals in both the private sector and in some pockets of the public sector in the oil and gas regulatory authorities, that we've closed off those loopholes, and that we are going to have a sector that will be internationally competitive. We are going to have tens of billions of dollars freed up for the development of our economy across sectors, the provision of world-class schools, hospitals, railways, roads, bridges, airports, seaports, dams, power plants, and the like. This is the nation that Nigerians want to build, and they have shown their commitment to that today by their response to the very necessary action that has now been implemented by the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. I'm very proud of them, and I know that in a very short while, they will fully appreciate that they have made the right decision to back and elect and after election support President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as he decisively and conclusively deals with the various challenges facing our dear nation.
All right, so we'll definitely still come back to this issue of subsidy. But the president also promised to take tough decisions in his attempt to turn things around in the country. In what areas do you think these are best needed?
I'm sorry, my sister, the last part of your question cut out. Can you repeat that, please?
The president has promised to take tough decisions in his attempt to turn things around in the country. In what areas do you think these are best needed?
Well, I think there are, of course, several sectors that require urgent attention. And this is by no means to in any way assert that the previous administration of President Muhammadu Buhari did not give its able best to deal with many of the deficits that this nation suffered from in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the provision of social safety nets and the like. all of which had been substantially upgraded under the previous administration. But it does speak to the fact that where you have 50 years, essentially, of neglect and maladministration, it's not something you're going to turn around in 8 years. It's something that's going to require continued government attention. And certainly we have confidence because of the track record of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu that this can be deepened and expedited and even enhanced in terms of its quality. Let me say that there are a few issues on the table. You're looking at, obviously, deepened infrastructure investment. You're looking at a massive increase in revenue generation across the board, not just in terms of how we are going to ensure that Nigerians at all income levels are paying their fair share of tax, but also in terms of how we create new opportunities for Nigerians so that they are in a situation of employability, so that they're in a position to pay tax. In addition to that, you're also looking at the fact that you're now freeing up tens of billions of dollars with the removal of the fuel subsidy that will now be reinvested in very critical exploration activities across this country. The president has been very clear, just as he did in Lagos, that it is time for our nation to not just think of how we're going to share national cake. No, it's time to enlarge that national cake to such an extent that, there's more than enough to go around to all parts of this country, not individuals, not into the pockets of a few elites, but into those developmental programs and policies that will ensure that the wide and robust masses of our people are uplifted from poverty, from undereducation, from unemployment, and many of the other vices that have really been the order of the day for such a long time in our country. If you're looking at agriculture, we are now going to scale up on what President Muhammadu Buhari achieved in terms of moving us very close now to total food self-sufficiency, to now getting to the point where we can mechanize our agricultural systems and value chains, that we can ensure that we create these market boards across the country where we can secure a basic minimum selling price for all commodities for our farmers to ensure that they have adequate profit margins for reinvestment and for the employment of new staff across farms across the country, therefore employing our people and expanding the tax net. And then, of course, it also allows us to really do what we campaigned on across the board, but specifically on the issue of the establishment of a consumer credit system. His Excellency President Bola Ahmed Tinubu was very clear in his inaugural address that it is time now to not just talk about establishing consumer credit system, but to actively develop what he called a credit culture. The fact that you can have a good or a service without necessarily fully paying for it upfront, in a way that is incremental, in a way that is installmental, in a way that is suitable to the unique, income situations confronting each individual Nigerian family. This is the future of the Nigerian economy, to create a broad base that allows for all Nigerian families, irrespective of income level in the country, to access certain goods and services so on a sustainable basis, and also upgrade. When they're done with their old car, they can now upgrade to a new car on that same, within the parameters of that same credit system. This creates sustainable employment. You have young men and women, young Nigerians, producing cars, building homes across the country, and all sorts of other, internally manufactured products that we had hitherto been, importing from abroad, creating jobs in other countries and all of that. That comes to an end, and it comes to an end now. And today's move was a major step in that direction.
All right, so let's get back to the issue of fuel subsidy, which is already generating ripples. With the new pump price regime announced by NNPC, what economic benefits will this bring in the long run to mitigate the suffering in the land?
Well, I think the first point of mention, if we talk about the immediate benefits, is that the current scenario in which our nation is essentially borrowing for a few elite groups of people to essentially smuggle these imported refined petroleum motor products across the border to their own benefit and the benefit of a few corrupt regulators that have been working with them, that this is not just untenable, but that we can now rededicate and reinvest those resources. Some within the NNPC to ensure that we can expedite the development of other frontier basins, such as the Bida Basin, such as the Anambra Basin in the southeast, such as the Benue Trough in the Middle Belt, and many other frontier basins that we know have prolific oil and gas deposits. We can now really invest in going into those places and accessing those massive oil and gas deposits that have been totally untapped to expand the revenue of the Federation. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is, of course, you're now going to see much more funding being paid back into the Federation account via royalties and taxes and dividends owed to the federal government that will now be onwardly shared to the other tiers of government, the state governments and the local governments. This is the kind of change that Nigerians have been clamoring for. It has been something that has been difficult in the past because we had seen a situation where labor unions would try and hold successive governments by the throat to ensure that this does not happen. But we have said that we have seen enough collusion between some of these labor unions and some of these, very, corrupt groups of black marketers who are paying off some of these people to continue to resist the removal of the fuel subsidy. But today, and with this election first, with this election of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, they have decided that a man that openly campaigned on the removal of fuel subsidy is going to be the man that they will empower to do what they gave him the mandate to do. And today, he has done it. And Nigerians should be proud of that.
All right, so that's it for the long-run benefits. But in the short run, what should governments do to cushion the effect of the new petrol price on citizens?
A very important point and question. First of all, there's no doubt about the fact that the government is totally empathetic. Certainly, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, even throughout the campaigns, when there was the Naira scarcity and some of the other issues that had come up, he was the one candidate that consistently stood on the side of the people, and his presidency will be no different. What we've said now is that it's extremely important that government is clearly empathetic with what the price increase at the pump is going to mean for Nigerian families across the country. And more important than the show of empathy is a demonstration of the empathy by putting in place those palliative measures that will ease their burden, which is why much has been discussed around the issue of the conditional cash transfer and how that's going to be executed. That's something that's still on the table of the president. I believe when it comes to palliatives, there are going to be some very detailed announcements as relates to how that is going to be executed and administered in the short run. But I would say, and I think this is very important, I am no longer an SSA to the president. I'm not a presidential spokesman. I am not a government official. I am a private citizen in this country now. And as a result of that, I can speak a bit more freely than maybe I have in the past. I think, as in my individual opinion, that even as we talk about economic palliatives for our people, the time has now come, I think, to recognize as at least a government, from a government perspective, that there is probably no palliative more potent than the palliative of justice. People want justice in this country. They want to, if government is coming to tell us that we have not, that tens of billions of dollars have been stolen, that we could have used to invest in so many other very important sectors of our economy, that have been stolen by a few individuals, stealing this product, smuggling it over borders, etc., etc. And then we know that there are corrupt regulators that have been working with them. I'm not speaking as somebody spreading rumor. I'm speaking as somebody who has privileged information, who was in the corridors of power just a few days ago. And I know that the midstream and downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority has its own fair share of rotten apples who work very closely with many of these cabals that are taking our fuel abroad to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars. And they will now be pretending to be those who are defending our interests. So I think when we talk about palliative, if Nigerians see government, this new administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu saying, look, we are going to investigate and we're going to make sure that we recoup as much of that diverted money as possible from those illicit activity, from those illicit marketers and transporters and distributors, then Nigerians will say, okay, fine. The sacrifice we're making is now vindicated and validated because we're now seeing that the people that stole this money in the first place are being brought to book. Justice is a very powerful, very potent palliative. And I'm certainly, as a citizen of the country, very hopeful that rule of law and order and justice and anti-corruption is not going to be something we just talk about, but something that Nigerians will actually get to see and experience for themselves under this administration. So let's watch and see.
Fantastic. So on the president's first day in office, we observed the presence of the NNPC Group CEO and the CBN governor. What do you think Nigerians can deduce from his first few days in office?
Well, I think one of the very clear indicators is that there is somebody taking a decision at the top, and there's one person taking that decision. It's not a group. There's no influence. There's no manipulation. There's no he said this one said this one, and people are saying different things from different sides of their mouth. This is one man at the top taking a decision, and everybody knows that this is the man taking the decision, and he's taking the decisions rapidly. And I think that's the first signal that has been sent. The second signal is that there is going to be a no-nonsense approach from the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. I cannot speak from inside of that administration. I am not in that administration. But what we can see from the outside looking in is clearly what we know of him from his days governing Lagos, is that this is somebody who does not wait to solve a problem. In fact, he's the kind of person that anticipates problems before they come and proactively puts in place those measures and procedures to checkmate problems before they can even arrive, not to speak of how he will react to a problem that is already pre-existing. This is who we elected, and Nigerians will be proud of that in due course as they see things unfold in the country. But let me just add that when we look at the projection, you would recall that one of the first activities that the president had really given a lot of attention to after he was inaugurated on the same May 29th, on the same Monday, was he spent hours engaging in very, specific, well-arranged meetings, almost bilateral, delegation by delegation, with the various visiting delegations that came to honor him and honor Nigeria on the day of his inauguration. And he was able to get into very substantive issues in the interest of the nation, really kickstarting the process of putting together a very cohesive, very strategic foreign policy that's going to ensure that the interests of our nation, as it relates to economic development, as it relates to political stability, as it relates to having effective geopolitical relations and, with other countries and positions on global issues of the day, that he's already started putting those kinds of positions forward to his contemporaries around the world. This is the kind of proactive leadership that we elected. This is the proactive leadership we're seeing, and I'm very optimistic that the respect and goodwill shown to Mr. President on the day of his inauguration is just a small foretaste of what we can expect from President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in terms of his ability to tap into decades-old, very rich, extensive networks of friends in the private and public sectors across various countries of the world, east, north, and west. So this is something that I think we're all going to be able to look forward to, and the fruits will be showing up very soon.
So, Mr. Ajuri, this meeting with foreign delegations who came to witness his inauguration, how do you think this will impact Nigeria's foreign relations in a complex global environment?
Truly, there's no doubt about the fact that Mr. President takes office at a time when you have multifarious crises around the world. We know what is going on between Russia and Ukraine, and we know what that has meant for supply chains, from energy to food production and distribution, to even the international affairs, how it has polarized in many ways various geopolitical groupings within the global community, and how member nations have, various nations have taken positions on one side or the other. When I say one side or the other, I would be referring to the bloc that everybody knows is led by the People's Republic of China. And then, of course, that includes Russia, Iran, increasingly Saudi Arabia, and many other like-minded countries. And then, of course, the bloc that is led by the United States of America, that includes many of the Western European nations, the G7, as it were, and many of even the G20 countries, including Japan, South Korea, and the like. We've seen a polarization. Now, what that now means is that Mr. President is taking office at a time when you have countries like South Africa now, because I want to bring it back to Africa and what the context is. Of the major economic players on the African continent, you have South Africa, for example, taking the position that they are quote-unquote neutral, even though they have been found to be supplying arms directly to the Russian Federation. So they've more or less taken a side. It's not too much of a surprise because they're a member of BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But it also creates some type of complication in terms of the position of other African nations as it relates to support for Ukraine. Obviously, Nigeria has a stated position that it wants the aggression in Ukraine to end, that it wants peace to be brought to that region, and that it supports all the moves of all the peacemakers to ensure that it arrives at that conclusion. But what it also means is that increasingly there are going to be very tough, serious decisions that will be made, not just by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, but by his entire foreign policy apparatus that I'm sure he's going to put together in the days and weeks ahead, that will now be looking at how we stratify those factors that will lead us to side with one nation or the other, one bloc or the other, and on what issue. So, for example, right now in the United States, you have an attempt by the United States government led by President Joe Biden to really create a kind of bifurcation or a split, two-split view of countries to be grouped as democracies and autocracies. Those are countries that are not run under a constitutional democratic setup. And what that now means is many of the countries that are siding with the United States, whether it be diplomatically, politically, or economically, or even in defense terms, in security terms, they are now increasingly having to, as a condition of siding with the United States on this core concept, are now having to try and move away from traditional allies who might not be operating traditional constitutional democracies, but are very important partners. For example, Nigeria has a very important partner in China, who, on the lowest interest rates you can find anywhere in the world, are providing very critical infrastructure projects from airports to seaports to rail lines and the like. These are things that the Western world had not necessarily shown a lot of interest in partnering with Africa on. They are showing an interest in helping us develop our continent. And in exchange, obviously, we're in partnership with them. So the question now is going to be about, yes, can we have a sophisticated and well thought out foreign policy driven by thinkers, by strategists, who understand the dynamics of the global environment in which we're operating, that will say, look, yes, United States, on the issue of democracy, we side with you. On the issue of human rights, we align with you. But on the issue of economic development, you have not been there for us. And so if you want us to side with you, show us what you're bringing to the table. And part of what getting something from the table involves us knowing what we want and how we're going to present what we want. If you don't make a demand, nobody's going to give you what you're asking for. So you have to first know what you're asking for. I believe under the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, you're going to have a president and a leadership within that foreign policy subsector that's going to understand very clearly that there are specific things that we are looking for now at this stage of our national development and our national life. And we are going to demand that those things are a part of whatever negotiations we're having with any country that wants us to side with them on any given issue. It's no longer about taking pictures and shaking hands with people at the White House. It's about making sure that we're coming away with something that will benefit the Nigerians who elected President Bola Ahmed Tinubu into power, and that should be the focus.
Fantastic. Let's take a break. I've been speaking with a journalist, author, and former Deputy Principal Spokesman of the Tinubu Presidential Campaign, Ajuri Ngelale. This conversation returns after this commercial break.